Hey, welcome back to Love Wins, where the truth matters because it's the truth that sets us free. And we are exploring the life of Jesus, and you would say, oh, well, I know the truth about Jesus. Everybody knows the truth about Jesus. He was Mary and Joseph's son, he was born in Bethlehem, blah, blah, blah. But does that mean that you actually know who Jesus is? Do we know who Jesus is? Does Christianity portray who Jesus is? Before we answer that, or even attempt to answer that, I want to remind us of a couple of things. When Jesus was here, the Jewish nation hated everyone. They saw all the other nations as Gentile dogs. They treated the Samaritans, which were their basically first cousins, as half-breeds, hated them. And the only people that they had any time for was their own people, and even among their own people. If you were poor or sick or, you were cursed of God and you didn't count either. Funny thing, if you go back to the very beginning, when God called Abraham, there was no nation of Israel. There were no Jews. The name Israel comes from Jacob, Abraham's grandson. The name Jew comes from Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, through whom Jesus came. They didn't exist. God called Abraham, who was a Syrian. He was a Syrian. And when he called him, he made him a promise that he would have descendants and they would be many, but there would be the seed, capital S, coming, in whom all the nations would be blessed. How did the Jews get from having Abraham the Assyrian as their father and him being promised to be the father of many nations, and that in him a seed would come who would bless all the nations? How did they get from there to the place where they hated all the nations? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. But does this make sense? We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know the rest. That we're all equal. That our Creator made us this way. That we have certain inalienable rights, such as life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Does that all sound familiar to you? And in the same country who wrote those beautiful and lofty words, true words, slaves were owned for a long time. An entire civil war was fought over it. How could you hold slaves in one hand, hold a Bible in the other hand, have a declaration of independence between the two that declares the Creator made all men equal and they have right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness? How does that happen? How did it happen that in the United States you had preachers who would stand in pulpits in Christian churches and justify, using the Bible, slavery, while still holding this idea that all men are created equal and have the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness? How does that happen? How do we end up claiming that we follow Jesus and yet misrepresent him in such wild ways? And are we silly enough, naive enough, deluded enough to think that all of that misrepresentation and wild hypocrisy is in the past? The Jews did that, and Americans did that before, but now we know Jesus. Now that wouldn't happen. Today, as I sit here and record this for you, I belong to a denomination that still has separate organizational structure in the United States based on color. Still. And we tolerate it and we make excuses for it and we say, oh, it's not really about racism, it's about functionality and it's about reaching people and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, if we really understood who Jesus is and we really understood what our mission is, and we really understood our place in the world and what we're supposed to be teaching the world through the way we live, not the words that we speak, we would have restructured a long time ago. In fact, we never would have structured that way to begin with. And some will push back on that, and maybe you have a point to a point. But there's no excuse anymore. But we tolerate it. It's normal. It's okay. We say one thing, we do something else. I just looked up the list of churches in my province in Alberta, Canada. 17 of them have in their name a specific people group. Yet we say with our words that we believe all nations, all languages, all people. With our words, we hold up a high ideal, a true ideal, but in practice, we don't live that way. But we say we're following Jesus. We say we're following Jesus. We say with our words, and we even believe with our head and our heart that we're following Jesus. But what Jesus? What Jesus? That's the whole point of this series. What was Jesus actually like? Not what did your church teach you he was like, not what did your parents teach you he was like, not what did your grandparents teach you what he's like, not what your religion teaches you that he's like. What was he actually like? Because when Jesus came, the difference between what he was actually like and what the church of his day believed he should be like and expected from him were so different that they killed him. They could not tolerate him. So different that the Bible says Jesus went up on a mountain overlooking Jerusalem and he wept. He wept. How long, he said, have I longed to gather you together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not. You want my name? You want to talk that you know me and follow me and love me, but when I actually call you to myself, you want nothing to do with me. The Bible says it this way in one place, you honor me with your lips, but your heart far from me. The very fact that there are thousands of different Christian denominations, all claiming different ideas and different truths, is plenty of evidence that we are not following Jesus. That perhaps we don't even know the one whose name we claim. So last night I was reading with my son, and we came to a part, we're reading in the book of Joshua, and we came to a part of the story that was impossible. And I could see the look on my son's face as he read it, and he was about to say something, and I should have let him say it. But I anticipated what was coming, and I said, it's impossible. What we're reading is impossible. And that's the point. That's the point. If you go back to when God called Abraham, he called a man and a wife who were childless and couldn't have children to be the father and mother of many nations. How's that going to work? And then to add impossible to impossible, he waited and he waited and he waited until Sarah got to the age where menopause came and she no longer had a cycle and she no longer was producing eggs. It was over. He waited so long that when he came back to Abraham and Sarah and said, I'm going to give you a son, just like I said years and years and years and years ago, Abraham laughed at him. Then Sarah laughed at him. And why did they laugh at him? Because they didn't know him. Because they didn't think he was any more capable than they were. You see, we are descended from a long line of people who don't know him, who underestimate him, who misunderstand him, who misrepresent him. It's been happening from the beginning. God waited till it was impossible because that was the point. It was the point. There are so many stories in the Old Testament where God took the impossible, made it more impossible, and then he acted. He called Gideon to gather an army to deliver his people. The army wasn't near big enough to begin with. And then God said, cut it down from 32,000 to 10,000, then cut it down to 300. Okay, now you can go fight. Now that it's beyond impossible and then beyond impossible again, now go fight. So that when it's over, you will know that you didn't win. I won for you. The Bible is not a book about a God who's limited like we're limited. It's not a book about a God who can only do what we're able to do for him. It's a book about the impossible. And so when it announces Jesus' line, his heritage, it throws in these stories of these women that we went through. Impossible. How could a holy God send a holy deliverer through such a line of mess? Because he's the God of the impossible. If you go back through the Old Testament, you will find 7 women who couldn't have children, who God used to birth an extraordinary child. And then it comes to Mary. And God went one step further. She's not going to be a woman who can't have children. She's going to be a woman who's never been with a man. And then it goes a step further and says, not only was Mary a virgin when Jesus was conceived and born, but it says Joseph did not know her, did not have relations with her, did not have sex with her until Jesus was born, so that nobody could say, well, it was a short pregnancy, he was premature. No, it was impossible. Because he's the God of the impossible. So when he makes wild claims, like he can change us, when he makes wild claims that he can forgive anyone, and will forgive anyone who confesses their sins, and it feels impossible, and it seems impossible, he laid it out from the beginning. I am the God of the impossible. That's not a problem. You haven't caught me when you find out there's something in my book that's impossible. It's the point of the book, that I am the God of the impossible. And one of the things God is going to do before Jesus returns is he's going to unite peoples. We're so divided, but he's going to raise up a people who are not divided, who represent to the world that it's possible to be different colors and languages and cultures and yet be one. It's why when he was here, he spent so much time outside the borders of Israel, pulling, drawing, reaching out, making the mess into one. This journey, what is Jesus like? It's no joke. But if you take it, you're going to find someone who's impossibly better than you ever imagined. We'll see you next time.